The station was quiet at 0300 hours. Most of the crew on board the Human Interstellar Defense Coalition's Central Command Station were either asleep or running routine checks on systems that had not blinked in months. The coffee machines hummed. The lights in the corridors were dimmed to half power. Outside the wide observation windows, the moon floated like a pale coin against the black of space, and beyond it, Earth turned slowly, blue and white and completely unaware of what was about to happen. Sora was the first one to hear it. She was sitting at her translation console on the lower deck, running overnight analysis on a batch of old Velthari commercial signals, the kind of slow frequency traffic that nobody else wanted to touch. She had headphones on one ear and a half-eaten rice ball in her hand, and she was 3 pages into a report she had been meaning to finish for a week. Then the signal came in. It was not like the normal Velthari traffic. Those were narrow, short, encrypted. This one was wide, extremely wide. It was broadcast on every known frequency band at the same time, the kind of broadcast designed not just to be heard, but to be impossible to ignore. Sora sat up straight. She dropped her rice ball. Her fingers moved across the console fast, pulling the signal apart layer by layer, running it through the translation engine, checking the output twice because she did not believe it the first time. It took her 11 minutes to decode the full message. Then she read it. Then she ran. She took the stairs instead of the lift because the lift felt too slow. She passed 2 confused technicians in the corridor and did not stop to explain. She pushed through the door of the war room at the top of the station and found it already half filled with officers who had been pulled from sleep by the same alert that had triggered across every department in the building. Everyone was talking at once. Everyone was pulling up screens. The main display on the far wall was cycling through the signal data, the frequency maps, the origin point, the transmission range, all of it scrolling fast and bright. Inha was sitting at the long table in the center of the room. She was alone at that table. Everyone else was standing, moving, speaking too fast. But Inha sat with both hands wrapped around a ceramic cup of tea, watching the main screen with an expression that gave nothing away. She was not panicking. She was not shouting orders. She was watching, the way someone watches a river before deciding where to cross it. Sora walked straight to her and placed the decoded transcript on the table. Inha looked at it. She did not touch it yet. She looked at Sora's face first, reading something there. Then she picked up the pages and read them slowly from top to bottom. The room was loud, but the space around Inha felt still, like the eye of something large and spinning. The message from the Velthari Dominion was written in formal galactic standard, the kind of language used for treaties and declarations, clean and precise, and without any warmth at all. It said that humanity was a biological and cultural contamination of civilized space. It said that the Velthari Dominion, acting in the interest of galactic stability, had determined that the continued expansion of the human species posed an unacceptable risk to the established order of the galaxy. It said that effective immediately, a state of total war existed between the Velthari Dominion and the human species. It said this clearly and without hesitation and without room for misunderstanding, and then it listed the fleet. 412 warships, 3 bioweapon carriers, 7 long-range planet disruptor platforms, troop transports carrying an estimated 900,000 soldiers. Inha finished reading. She set the pages down on the table with a soft sound. She picked up her cup of tea and took a slow sip. The room was still very loud. Someone was already on a channel to Earth, relaying the broadcast to the planetary governments below. Daiho came through the side door with his. Daiho came through the side door with his jacket half-buttoned and his hair not quite right, which meant he had been asleep less than an hour ago. He looked at the main screen. He looked at the data. His jaw tightened slowly. He crossed the room and stopped next to Inha. She was looking at the fleet manifest again, specifically at the bioweapon carriers. She was reading the technical designations with the same careful expression she had used on everything else. The room went a little quieter as more people noticed she had not yet said anything. Inha had a quality that was difficult to explain but easy to feel. When she went still, the people around her slowed down too. It was not something she did on purpose. It was just what happened, like how water goes calm in the center of a wide basin. Daiho looked at the manifest over her shoulder. He had been her second in command for 4 years. He had seen her in difficult situations before, more than a few of them serious. But even he had never looked at a war declaration like this one, not one aimed at Earth, not one this real, and this large, and this close. "They are serious," he said quietly. Inha did not answer that. She set the manifest down gently on top of the other pages. She looked at the far wall, where the signal was still cycling, the Veltari broadcast still playing on the screen, with the translated words scrolling across the bottom. The warlord's voice was deep and flat, and carried a tone that was clearly intended to communicate finality. Then Inha said something. She said it quietly, almost to herself, not quite to Daiho, not quite to the room. It came out the way certain words come out when a person has been turning them over in their mind for a long time and finally finds them relevant. "Good." Daiho looked at her. "Doom incoming," she said. It was not a question. It was not a statement of fear. It was not even a warning. It was said the way someone says a word when they have been waiting a long time to finally use it, flat and calm and certain, like checking off the first item on a list. Daiho stared at her for a moment. Around them, a few people had gone completely still, listening. "What does that mean?" he asked. Inha finally turned to look at him. Her expression had not changed, not 1 degree from the calm it had been when Sora first walked through the door with the decoded pages in her hand. "It means theirs," she said. She picked up her tea again. She turned back to the screen where the Veltari fleet numbers were still displayed, 412 ships, and she looked at them the way someone looks at a problem they have already solved. "Get Kangen up," she said. "Tell him it is time, and send word to Earth that their governments can keep panicking if they want to." She paused. "We have work to do." The Velthari High Council celebrated. It was not a quiet celebration. The council chamber on the Dominion's central world, a planet called Veth Aurum, was filled with sound and light and the deep resonant tones of Velthari ceremonial music. The council members who had pushed for the war declaration over the last 3 years were now standing tall, speaking in loud voices about history and destiny and the long-overdue cleansing of the galaxy's lesser species. They drank from tall vessels of something warm and dark. They clapped each other on the shoulder plates and laughed in the way that people laugh when they believe they have already won something before it has begun. And Supreme Warlord Velothari stood at the head of the chamber and let them celebrate. He did not celebrate himself. He watched, and he thought, and he read the intelligence files his analysts had prepared on the human species one more time. He had read them 5 times already, but he read them once more, standing at the edge of the celebration with a vessel he had not drunk from in his hand, and going through each section with the same careful attention he gave to every military document that crossed his desk. The files were not impressive. That was the honest truth of it. Humans had been in interstellar space for just under 200 years. They had no psionic ability whatsoever, which put them at an immediate disadvantage against most of the older species in the galaxy. Their biological engineering was primitive compared to Velthari standards. Their fleet was a fraction of Dominion fleet strength in both number and total firepower. They had no hive-mind coordination, no shared consciousness network, no deep-range telepathic command structure. They did not even have a single unified government, technically, though the Human Interstellar Defense Coalition operated as one in practice. By every single measure the Dominion used to classify a species' threat level, humanity ranked near the bottom of the scale, and the analysts had placed them at Class 2, emerging threat, manageable, containable, removable. Velothari closed the file. He told himself he was not worried. He almost believed it. On the HIDC Central Command Station, nobody was celebrating. The lights were back to full power, and had been since Inha gave the order to go to active status 4 hours after the declaration came in. Every department was running. Every system was warm. The corridors had a different feel to them now, sharper, faster, the way a body feels different when it stops resting and starts moving towards something. Inha had not slept. She did not appear to need to. She was standing in the lower engineering bay when Kangan finally arrived, still pulling on his work coat, his dark hair pointing in 3 directions, a streak of something silver on his left forearm from whatever project he had been working on before the call came through. He was not a tall man, and he did not look like the person who held the most important engineering secret in human history. He looked like someone who fixed old machines for a living and generally preferred machines to people, which was more or less accurate. But Kangan had built Gore. That was the thing about him. He looked ordinary until you knew what he had made. Inha waited until he was standing in front of her. She looked at him steadily for a moment. "It is time," she said. Kangan nodded once. He looked neither excited nor afraid. He looked like a man who had been waiting a very long time for a specific date on a calendar, and that date had finally come. "I will need the deep array receivers brought online," he said. "The ones registered to the survey program." "Already done," Inha said. He raised his eyebrows slightly. That was his version of being impressed. Gore was not technically a weapon. That was the detail that mattered most legally, and the detail that had kept it completely off every galactic treaty register for 60 years. It was officially registered with the Galactic Oversight Council as a deep space geological survey array, a network of platforms positioned across the outer and middle solar system, built to map gravitational anomalies and deep space mineral formations in the region around the Sun. That was what the official paperwork said. That was what every inspection over the decades had confirmed, because every inspection had only ever examined what the platforms did in their surface-level operating mode. What they did in their secondary mode was a very different thing. Kangan had designed the secondary mode over a career spanning 4 decades. He had never told anyone outside of Inha, Daiho, and a small and very carefully selected team of engineers who had each signed documents that no galactic court had any jurisdiction over. The Gore network, when fully activated, was capable of projecting a directional disruption field across a 2 million kilometer radius. It could disable the power cores of Velthari-class warships without destroying them. It could target specific systems on a vessel and leave all other systems untouched. It was precise in a way that most weapons were not, because Kangan had built it that way deliberately, from the very first design. When Inha had first commissioned the project, she had told him clearly that she did not want a weapon that killed. She wanted a weapon that stopped. He had delivered exactly that. Daeho arrived in the engineering bay 20 minutes later with a tablet showing the latest fleet movement data. The Velthari Advance Fleet, 80 ships in tight formation, had already crossed the outer marker of the solar system's main approach corridor. They were moving fast, and they were moving with the easy confidence of people who had not yet found a reason to slow down. "They are not slowing down," Daeho said. "No," Inha said. "They would not. They think this is going to be easy." "Is it?" Daeho asked. He was not being sarcastic. He was genuinely asking, the way he always did, because he trusted her answer more than he trusted his own reading of a situation. Inha looked at him. "For us?" "Yes." She turned back to Kangen. "How long until full activation?" 6 hours, Kangen said. "Maybe 5 if the secondary receivers are already at temperature." "Make it 5, she said. She walked toward the door, then stopped. She turned back to both of them. "I want something understood," she said. Her voice was even and quiet. It was always even and quiet. "We are not going to destroy their ships. We are not going to kill their soldiers. We are going to stop them completely, disable every vessel, and we are going to leave every single one of them alive, unharmed, able to speak." Daeho frowned slightly. "Why does that matter?" "Because dead soldiers tell no stories," Inha said, "and we need this story told, across every system the Velthari Dominion controls. We need their people to hear what happened here from the mouths of the soldiers who were present, not from a report, not from a government announcement, from the people who were inside the ships when the lights went out." She looked at both of them for a moment longer. There was something in her face that was not quite sadness and not quite calculation. It was something between the two, the expression of a person who understands the weight of what they are doing and carries it without complaint. "We are not just fighting a war," she said. "We are teaching a lesson, and the lesson only works if the students survive it. A lesson a dead student cannot carry home teaches nothing at all." She left the room. Daeho stood still for a moment. He looked at Kangen. Kangen was already walking back toward his main console. He picked up a calibration tool from the bench beside it without looking and held it loosely in one hand. He glanced back at Daeho over his shoulder. "She has been planning this for a very long time," Kangen said simply. There was no particular emotion in it. It was just true. Then he sat down at his console and got to work. Across the solar system, in the cold dark of the outer ring, 63 Gori platform receivers began to warm up one by one, quietly, drawing power from the deep current lines that ran beneath them, systems coming online after years of patient and deliberate waiting. From the outside, if any Velthari sensor had been looking, they would have appeared exactly as they always had. A geological survey array, running a routine scan. The outer belt corridor was one of the emptiest places in the solar system. There was nothing there except rock and cold and silence and the very faint radio noise that all of space carries underneath everything, like a breath held for 1 billion years. Dust drifted in long, slow clouds between the large asteroids. The light from the sun reached this far as little more than a suggestion. The Velthari Advance Fleet moved through it in tight formation, the 80 ships arranged in a standard Dominion wedge pattern with the 3 largest warships at the front and the support vessels fanned out behind them. They were running full sensor sweeps on wide rotation, the kind of thorough scanning protocol used when entering contested territory. Their readings came back clean. Open space, scattered rock formations, background radiation within expected ranges, no patrol line, no automated defense stations, no grid of any kind. Fleet Commander Drathvel watched his screens from the bridge of the flagship and felt a growing impatience building behind his eyes. He had expected at least a symbolic resistance by now, some gesture, a handful of human ships positioned at the corridor entry to show that the species had pride, even if they had no real power. That was what every species did. It was almost a formality, the kind of thing that gave a war its proper shape. There was nothing, just open dark and silence. He pushed the fleet forward at increased speed. If the humans were not going to come out and meet them, then the faster this was over, the better. He had been moving through the kill box for 11 minutes when the voice came through on his comm channel. It came in on a frequency his ships used for internal communication between officers, a channel that should have been impossible for anyone outside the fleet to access. The voice was calm. It was almost polite. "A box," the voice said. "You have been for box," the voice said. "You have been for 11 minutes." Drathvel turned fast toward his communications officer. The officer was already working, hands moving across the console at speed, trying to locate the source, trying to make sense of the signal readings. The data coming back made no sense at all. The transmission was coming from the asteroid formations on both sides of the corridor. It was coming from above and below the fleet's current plane. It was coming from the space directly behind them, from the area they had already passed through. It was coming from everywhere at once. Before Drathvel could form a complete order in his mind, let alone speak it, the Gore network came fully alive. There was no sound. Space does not carry sound. There was no visible light, and no dramatic pulse of energy that could be seen from the outside. From inside the command station's engineering bay, Kangan watched his screens as the numbers began to move, clean and steady and exact, each reading confirming what the last one had, and one by one the power cores of the 80 Velthari warships began to shut down. Not burn, not explode, not fail catastrophically in fire and debris. Shut down, quietly, completely. The field reached into each vessel's core systems with the precision of a hand reaching into a machine to remove a single gear. The engines went cold. The weapon systems dropped offline. Navigation went dark. Communications cut to nothing. Artificial gravity flickered and held on backup for 30 seconds, and then that too went still. But the life support stayed on. In every single ship, the air kept moving. The temperature held. The emergency lighting came up in dull red strips along the corridor floors. Kangan had spent 3 extra years on that particular detail, and he had done it without being asked, because he had understood before Inha told him what she needed the outcome to look like. 80 ships drifted in the dark. Back at the command station, Deho stood in front of the sensor display and watched the last contact go cold on the screen. He was quiet for a long moment. Around him, the ops team was reading out confirmations one after another, each ship's status changing from active to disabled in the log, each entry accompanied by a life sign reading that showed the crews inside alive and unharmed. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "All 80 confirmed offline," the sensor officer said. "Life signs across all vessels reading normal." Deho opened the channel that connected him to Nari's marine unit aboard the carrier ship Bukan. "It is your turn," he said. Nari had been waiting in the deployment bay for 4 hours. Her unit of 40 Marines was fully suited, fully armed, and thoroughly bored, which Nari had come to understand over 11 years of service was simply the natural condition of Marines in the period before a mission. She was sitting on a supply crate near the bay door with her helmet resting on her knee, listening to one of her soldiers finish a very long story about a card game that had gone badly on a station near Titan. The story had been going on for 20 minutes. It showed no signs of ending. When Daeho's voice came through, she stood up, picked up her helmet, and put it on. "Move," she said. That was all she said, and the unit moved. The Bukan launched 6 boarding shuttles before the Velthari ships had fully stopped drifting. Nari's shuttle came in on the flagship's docking port from the underside, matching the dead ship's rotation smoothly, latching clean on the first attempt. The outer door was cut through in 40 seconds. The corridor inside was dark except for the red strip lighting along the floor, and the air that came through the entry smelled sharp and metallic in the way Velthari ships always did, a detail the pre-mission briefings had mentioned twice. The crew was not fighting. That was the first thing Nari noticed, and it was the most important thing. The Velthari soldiers were backed against the walls of the main corridor. Some of them crouched low with their hands visible, some of them standing very still with their arms held slightly away from their bodies. All of them were watching the humans come through the door with expressions that were hard to read on Velthari faces, but Sora had told the Marine units before deployment what to look for. The eye membrane pulled back at a specific angle, the jaw plates set in a particular way, the slight change in the ridge structure above the brow. Fear, not the fear of someone about to be attacked, something older and quieter than that. The fear of someone standing in front of a thing they cannot categorize, cannot explain, and cannot predict. That is the deepest kind of fear there is, and it was on every face in that corridor. Nari walked through without rushing, her unit spread out behind her with the easy, unhurried movement of people who had trained this exact entry more times than they could count. Nobody raised a weapon. There was nothing to raise it at. She found Drathvel on the bridge. He was sitting in his command chair, and he had not moved from it. He was a large creature by Velthari standards, broad across the shoulders and long in the torso, the rank markings on his armor indicating many years of service. He looked at Nari the way a person looks at something that does not fit into any category they have ever used. Nari pulled her helmet off. She held it in one hand. She looked directly at Drathvel. "We are not here to hurt anyone," she said. Her voice was steady and even. "Your ships are disabled. Your soldiers are unharmed. We are going to secure this vessel and the rest of your fleet, and when that is done, we are going to make sure everyone has what they need." Drathvel stared at her. "Why?" he said through his translator. The word came out rough and genuinely confused. "Because that is how we do this," Nari said simply. She set her helmet on the floor beside her, unpulled a folding crate from the pack one of her soldiers carried, and sat down on it in the middle of the bridge. She looked at the Velthari fleet commander and waited, quietly, for him to stop being surprised enough to have a real conversation. 2 hours and 14 minutes after the advance fleet first entered the corridor, the engagement was fully complete. 80 ships, 0 human casualties, 912 Velthari soldiers and crew, alive and unharmed, and sitting in their own vessels with the lights off and a very large amount of time to think about what had just happened to them. On the command station, Daeho looked at the final numbers on his screen. He sat back slowly in his chair. He opened the channel to Inha. "It is done," he said. There was a short pause on her end, a breath of silence. "Good," she said. She closed the channel. The message from Velthari came through 18 hours after the advance fleet went dark. It did not come through the official Dominion military channel. It did not come through the galactic standard emergency frequency that both sides technically had access to. It came through a private encrypted line that the Dominion used for quiet communication between the most senior commanders. The kind of channel that officially did not exist in any treaty or public record, and that was used in practice only when a person with a great deal of power needed to say something they could not say anywhere else. The fact that Velithari used it told Inha more than anything he could have said out loud on an open frequency. She accepted the call. She told Daiho and Sora to stay in the room because she needed Sora's real-time translation support, and because Daiho had been her second long enough that she had stopped keeping things from him. She did not invite anyone else. The room was small and quiet, the kind of quiet that comes not from emptiness, but from deliberate stillness. Velithari's image appeared on screen. He was older than his military files had suggested, or perhaps the last 18 hours had done something to him that files could not have predicted. His eye membranes were drawn back in the way Sora had described to Nari's Marines before the first engagement, that expression of deep uncertainty. But on Velithari, it was layered over with something else that was harder to name. It was not quite respect, not yet. It was closer to the expression of a person who has run the same calculation twice, gotten the same unwelcome answer both times, and has not yet fully decided what to do with the result. He looked at Inha for a moment without speaking. Then he said one word. How? It was the same word Drath Vel had used on the boarding feed from the flagship. Sora had noted that quietly when reviewing the recordings. The way she noted everything she thought might be significant later. She noted it again now and said nothing. Inha set her tea down. She thought for a moment, not because she needed time to locate the answer, but because she was deciding how much of it to give him and in what order. You read our file, she said. Velithari waited. 200 years in space, Inha said. No psionic ability, no biofleet, small numbers, Class 2 threat. She looked at him evenly. Your analysts were not wrong about any of those facts. The file was accurate in everything it contained. Then how? He said again. Because the file only started 200 years ago, Inha said. She pulled up the display beside the screen and turned it toward the camera so he could see it clearly. It was a timeline, a very long one. It started roughly 10,000 years in the past, and it ran forward to the present day in a straight line, covered in markers, hundreds of them, each one representing a conflict. Not a space war. Wars on the ground. Wars fought over water, over territory, over food and belief, and words written in books. Wars that had burned entire civilizations to the ground and forced whatever remained to rebuild from almost nothing. We have been doing this since before we had writing, Inha said. Every weapon your fleet carries, a human mind worked out the basic principle of it before we ever left our own atmosphere. Every fleet tactic your warlords studied from Dominion military history, a human general used a version of it first, and another human general developed the counter to it, and another human general after that developed the counter to the counter. She let him look at the timeline for a moment without speaking. When the Velthari Dominion was launching its first interstellar warships, we were already 6,000 years into understanding how to fight, she said, how to lose, which matters more, how to rebuild after a loss, which matters most of all, to become good at this. Longer than you to become good at this. Longer than you knew when you wrote that file. Velithari was quiet. His jaw plates shifted slightly, which Sora had described to the Marines as the Velthari equivalent of a person pressing their lips together while they think. Your disruption platforms, he said. We registered them as geological survey arrays. They are geological survey arrays, Kangan said from his chair in the corner of the room, not looking up from his tablet. They survey the structural condition of incoming ships. Velothari looked at him. Then he looked back at Inha. The rest of my fleet, he said. His voice had changed slightly. The flatness in it was still there, but underneath it now was something with more weight to it. 320 ships, and they are holding position at the outer system boundary. I know, Inha said. If I order them forward. Inha turned to her own display and pressed a key. The casualty projection that Kangen had built and refined in the weeks before the declaration came appeared on the screen. She turned it so that Velothari could see every number on it without difficulty. He looked at it. He was quiet for a long time. Longer than anything else in the conversation had made him quiet. His hands, which were visible at the edge of the frame, did not move. The projection was not a human casualty model. There were no projected human losses in it at all, because Kangen had not included any. Not because he was being dramatic, but because the model had not produced numbers worth including. The only casualty figures in the document were Velthari ones, and they were built on the assumption of full activation of the GORAE network combined with the secondary tactical response systems that Inha had positioned throughout the inner system over the last 3 months without announcing them to anyone. The numbers at the bottom of the projection were not good, not for the Velthari. Velothari stared at the document. The silence stretched. Is this real? He said at last. Is this what will actually happen? He was not asking it as a challenge. He was asking it the way a person asks when they want to be told they are wrong about something. Sora looked up from her console in the corner. She had been watching Velothari's expression on the secondary screen throughout the entire conversation, reading the small movements in his face, structure the way she read everything, carefully and without rush. She had been waiting for the right moment. This was it. Commander Inha does not bluff, Sora said simply. Oh, she does not need to. Velothari looked at her. Then he looked back at Inha. Half my council wants to push forward, he said. I know, Inha said. They believe that to stop now is worse than any possible defeat. It is a cultural principle. To turn back after a declaration has been made is considered a permanent dishonor. I understand that thinking, Inha said. There was no judgment in her voice. We have had it too, many times. It has cost us a great deal over the centuries, entire generations, cities that no longer exist. She looked at him. I am not asking you to retreat. I am asking you to stop. Those are different things. Retreat is moving backward from a fight you started. Stopping is choosing not to continue down a road you can already see the end of. Velothari was quiet again. He looked at the casualty projection one more time. And if they vote to push forward despite this, he said. He said it quietly, almost as though he was not entirely asking her and was partly asking himself. Inha was still for a moment. Then they will teach us nothing new, she said, and we will teach them everything. She did not say it with anger. She did not say it with satisfaction, or with the particular edge that people use when they want someone to know they are dangerous. She said it the way someone states the result of an equation they have already solved, something that is simply true, regardless of how anyone in the room feels about it. Velothari looked at her for a long moment. Then he closed the channel. The screen went blank. In the small room, nobody spoke for a moment. Daiho was still looking at the place on the screen where Velothari's face had been. Sora was making a note on her console. Kangen had gone back to his tablet. Daiho said, What do you think he will do? Inha was quiet. She picked up her tea, and she looked at the blank screen. I think half his council has never lost anything before, she said. And I think that is a much more serious problem for them than it is for us. She set her cup down. She looked at Deho. Get Nari's units resupplied, she said. Full loadout, and bring the second boarding wave to ready status. She stood up. We have until they make their decision. Use the time. The vote in the Velthari High Council lasted 9 hours. Velothari argued against advancing. He had the casualty projection. He had the full recording of what had happened to the 80-ship advance fleet, disabled cleanly and completely in a matter of minutes. Every soldier alive, every ship intact, the whole thing accomplished without a single human casualty on either side. He placed all of it in front of his council members and made the case as clearly and as carefully as he could. He was not a man who frightened easily, and he was not making the argument from fear. And he was making it because the mathematics were clear, and he had been a commander long enough to know what clear mathematics meant. 5 council members agreed with him. 7 did not. Pride is a difficult thing to reason with. The 7 who voted to advance were not unintelligent. They were experienced commanders with long records of service. They had fought wars before, and they had won every one of them. But that was exactly the problem. They had never lost. Not once. On projection, and saw numbers that did not projection, and saw numbers that did not match what their experience told them to expect. They set the numbers aside instead of setting their experience aside. They could not imagine a species this young and this small doing what Inha's projection claimed. The number felt wrong. So they voted against it. The main Velthari fleet crossed the outer system marker at 0600 hours, station time. 320 ships, the remaining full strength of the Velthari War Declaration, moving in deep formation, a wall of power that stretched across the approach corridor from edge to edge. They passed the area where the advance fleet still drifted in the dark, cold and silent and unmoving, and they did not slow down for it. On the HIDC command station, the sensor alert came in 2 minutes before Inha expected it. She was already at the command deck. She had been there for 3 hours, sitting in the same chair she always used, a fresh cup of tea on the console beside her, going through the boarding team assignments one last time with the careful attention she gave to everything. Kangan's voice came over the channel from the engineering bay below. Garay is at full activation capacity, he said. All 63 platforms holding. Waiting on your mark. Inha looked at the display in front of her. 320 contact markers moving in steady formation through the outer corridor. Each one a ship the size of a city block. Each one carrying hundreds of soldiers who had voted for nothing and been brought here by the decision of 7 people who had never been wrong before and had not understood what that meant. She looked at Deho. He looked back at her. He had nothing to add, and she had taught him that sometimes the right thing to say before a thing like this is nothing at all. She nodded once. Mark, she said. What followed was not a battle the way stories usually describe battles. There were no explosions cutting bright lines through the dark. There were no heroic exchanges of fire between evenly matched forces, no moment where the outcome hung in the balance and could have gone either way. It was not that kind of thing. It had never been going to be that kind of thing, because Inha had made sure of that months before the declaration ever came through. It was quiet. It was complete. And it was written in the records afterward, not as a victory, but as a conclusion. The Gore network spread its field across the full activation range, and the Velthari fleet began to go dark the same way the advance fleet had, ship by ship in sequence, like the power cores shutting down one after another, with the steady rhythm of a long task being finished properly. It took longer this time because there were 4 times as many ships, and Kangan sat at his console and watched each reading change and said nothing and did not look away until the last one was done. By the 48th minute, every contact on the display was cold. No power, no movement. 320 ships drifting in the outer system dark. Every crew member inside alive. The air still moving, the emergency lighting still running in red strips along the floor. Nari's boarding teams were already moving before the last ship went cold. 12 carrier vessels deployed simultaneously, the largest coordinated boarding operation in human history. 140 Marines in the first wave, and 80 more in immediate reserve. Shuttles spreading out across the disabled fleet in the pattern Nari had spent 3 days building and rehearsed twice with her full unit. Now every team had its assigned ships. Every team knew its entry points and its secondary routes and its fallback positions if something went wrong. Nothing went wrong. By the 3rd hour, they had personnel on 280 vessels. By the 6th hour, the fleet was fully secured. Nari boarded the Velthari command ship herself. It was much larger than Drath Vel's flagship, wider across the hull than some of the smaller human stations, and the interior corridors broad enough for 4 Velthari soldiers to walk side by side with room to spare. The crew aboard it numbered in the thousands. Nari walked through corridor after corridor, and not one of them fought. They stood in their bays and their rest areas and their command rooms, and they watched the human Marines come through with helmets removed and weapons at rest, and the expression on every face was the same one Nari had seen on Drathvel's bridge, on something that had no good category, something that would take a long time to fully understand. One young Velthari soldier near the forward crew bay, barely into its first year of service by the look of the rank markings on its armor, stopped Nari's corporal with a direct question. It simply reached out one hand and waited until the corporal stopped walking, and then it asked through its translator unit, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound steady. "Why are you doing this?" it said. The corporal, a quiet man who had been in the Marine Corps for 11 years and had grown up in a small city on the southern coast of the peninsula, looked at the young soldier for a moment. "Because Commander Inha said so," he replied. And then, because he was a kind person when the mission allowed for it, he reached into his pack and handed the young soldier an extra field ration. The young soldier held it and looked at it for a long time. When the final numbers were confirmed and sent up to the command station, Deho read them out in a steady voice to the ops room. 0 ships destroyed across both engagements. 0 human casualties in either the advance fleet operation or the main fleet operation. Approximately 41,000 Velthari soldiers and crew, alive and unharmed, distributed across the captured and secured fleet. The ops room was quiet. Not the quiet of shock or of exhaustion. The quiet of people who had done something very large and were still in the moment right after it, before the weight of it had fully settled. Inha stood at the command display and looked at the numbers. She stood there for a moment without speaking. Then she turned and walked to her desk at the side of the room and sat down. She poured a fresh cup of tea from the flask she kept at the desk's corner. She opened a new document on her screen and began to type. Deho came to stand behind her. He watched her type without interrupting. He had learned a long time ago that Inha writing was not Inha waiting to be talked to. She wrote the after-action report the way she wrote everything, carefully, without extra words. The facts first, then the numbers, then the tactical summary, then the recommendations. She wrote it as though she were writing about a training exercise, with the same measured tone and the same careful structure, because to her, that was the honest way to write it. It had gone the way it was supposed to go. There was nothing to dramatize. At the bottom of the document, in the field marked Recommendations and Notes, she wrote a single line. Deho leaned forward and read it. He was still for a moment. Then, very quietly, he laughed, just once. A short sound, but it was completely real. The line read, War declared by Veltari Dominion. War concluded. Recommend Galactic Council update human threat classification immediately. Previous rating, Class 2, an emerging. Recommended new rating, Class Omega, do not engage. Inha did not laugh. She did not smile. She read back through the document from the beginning to check it for errors, the way she always did. Outside the wide observation windows, the moon was still there in the same place it had always been. Earth was still turning below it, blue and white and quiet. The cities on its surface lit up in the night side like scattered sparks. Indoors of the outer system, 41,000 of the outer system. 41,000 soldiers were sitting in cold ships with the emergency lights on and a very long time ahead of them. And soon, the rescue ships that Velithari would send, because he was that kind of commander, would bring them home, and they would walk off those ships, and people would ask them what happened, what it was like, what the humans were, and they would have to find words for something they did not yet have words for, and those words would spread across the Dominion, into the councils and the academies and the households, and the places where young soldiers were trained, into the histories, into every file that any species in the galaxy kept on the human race. The lesson had been given. Inha submitted the report, closed her screen, and finished her tea.